You used to have to get in the car and drive to 3 different stores just to compare the price of a washing machine. Not online, not on your phone. You physically walked into Sears, then Montgomery Ward, then the local appliance dealer, and you wrote the prices down on a piece of paper with a pencil. And that was just a Tuesday afternoon. Before the internet, the simplest tasks required effort that would seem absurd today. Number 42 on this list involves something you had to do every single time you wanted to watch a rented movie. Number 17 required you to stand in a line that wrapped around a building in the cold. And number 6 will remind you of a chore that consumed entire weekends and a coffee can full of quarters. So hit subscribe and settle in, because here are 100 things you actually had to do before the internet existed. Number 100. Calling directory assistants to get a phone number. If you needed to reach a business in another city and you did not have their number, you picked up the phone and dialed 411. A live operator answered. You told them the city, the state, and the name of the business, and they looked it up for you. Sometimes they connected you directly. Sometimes they just read the number out loud and you scrambled for a pen. The phone company charged you for every single call to directory assistants, and by the mid-1990s, that charge had climbed to 75 cents or more per inquiry. People kept personal phone books in their kitchen drawers, specifically to avoid paying that fee over and over again. You wrote in pencil because businesses changed their numbers, and you erased and rewrote until the page was gray. Number 99. Physically going to the bank to check your balance. There was no app. There was no website. If you wanted to know how much money was in your checking account, you either called the bank during business hours and waited on hold, or you drove there and asked a teller. Many people simply kept a running total in their check register, subtracting every check they wrote by hand with a pencil and a small calculator. If your math was off by even $1, you might bounce a check and get hit with a fee that cost more than whatever you bought in the first place. Some banks charged for balance inquiries over the phone, so you were paying money just to find out how much money you had. Number 98. Checking the stock prices in the financial section of the morning newspaper. If you owned shares or just wanted to know how the market was doing, you opened the newspaper to the back pages where tiny columns of numbers ran in tight rows. Every company was listed alphabetically with yesterday's closing price, the high, the low, and how much it changed. You ran your finger down the column looking for the one you cared about. The print was so small you sometimes needed reading glasses, and those numbers were already a day old by the time you saw them. There was no refreshing a screen, no live ticker, running on your phone. You got one look per day, and that was it. If something major happened between editions, you did not find out until the evening news. Number 97. Waiting for the newspaper to find out who won the game. If a baseball game ended after your local news broadcast, you did not know the score until the next morning. You walked out to the driveway in your robe and slippers, picked up the newspaper, turned to the sports section, and scanned the box scores printed in tiny type across the page. Monday morning was the only way to get the full weekend results. There was no scrolling, no alerts, no push notifications lighting up a screen. You waited, and the paper told you when it was ready. If the paper boy was late, even that small piece of information was delayed. You went to work not knowing who won until you found the paper on your desk in the break room. Number 96. Mailing away for things and waiting 6 to 8 weeks. The back pages of magazines were filled with small advertisements for products you could order by mail. You tore out the order form, filled in your name and address by hand, wrote a check or taped coins to a piece of cardboard, sealed it in an envelope, and dropped it in the mailbox. Then you waited. 6 to 8 weeks for delivery was standard. You had no tracking number, you had no confirmation email, you simply hoped it would show up, and most of the time it eventually did. Children ordered decoder rings, sea monkeys, and magic kits this way, and the wait felt like a lifetime. By the time the package arrived, you had almost forgotten you ordered it, which made it feel like a gift from your past self. Number 95. Calling your mother or grandmother on the phone to get a recipe. You did not type a dish into a search bar. You picked up the phone and asked, and she never had it written down in exact measurements. It was always a pinch of this, a handful of that. Cook it until it looks right. You stood in the kitchen with the receiver tucked between your shoulder and your ear, scribbling notes on the back of an envelope while she talked you through every step from memory. Sometimes you called back halfway through because you forgot whether she said a teaspoon or a tablespoon. That recipe existed in one place, and it was in her head. If you did not call, you did not eat it that way. Number 94. Using a payphone when you were away from home. If your car broke down on the highway, you walked to the nearest pay phone. If you were at the mall and needed a ride, you found the payphones near the restrooms. A local call cost a dime in the 1960s and eventually climbed to a quarter. You always kept spare change in your pocket or your glove compartment specifically for this purpose. Long-distance calls from a payphone required a pocket full of quarters or a calling card number you had memorized. The receiver was heavy, the cord was metal, and the booth smelled like cigarettes and strangers, but it was your only lifeline when you were out in the world and needed to reach someone. Number 93. Buying an entire album to hear one song. If you heard a song on the radio and wanted to own it, your options were limited. You could buy the 45 single if it had been released as one, or you bought the full album for $10 or $12 at the record store. That was a significant amount of money for a single 3-minute track you actually wanted, surrounded by 9 or 10 tracks you had never heard. Most people just waited by the radio with a blank cassette tape queued up in the boombox, ready to press record the next time the DJ played it. Timing was everything. You almost always missed the first few seconds, or the DJ talked over the intro and you were left with an imperfect copy. But that imperfect copy was yours. Number 92. Writing actual letters to stay in touch with people who moved away. When a friend moved to another state, your options for staying connected were a phone call that cost real money by the minute, or a handwritten letter. You sat down with a pen and paper, wrote several pages about your life, addressed the envelope, bought a stamp, and mailed it. Then you waited days or weeks for a reply. Entire relationships were maintained this way. Pen pals exchanged letters for years without ever seeing each other's faces. The anticipation of checking the mailbox and finding a letter with familiar handwriting on the envelope was a genuine highlight of the week. People saved those letters in shoe boxes. They reread them. They carried them with them when they moved. Number 91. Going to the library to do any kind of research. A school report meant a trip to the public library. You searched the card catalog, a wooden cabinet of small drawers filled with index cards organized alphabetically by subject, title, and author. You wrote down the Dewey Decimal numbers on a scrap of paper, then walked through the stacks hunting for the right shelf. If the book you needed was checked out, you were out of luck. You either waited for it to come back or found a different angle for your paper. College students sometimes drove to university libraries in other towns just to access a single source they could not find locally. Knowledge required physical effort. It required driving, walking, searching, and sometimes settling for whatever the shelf had left. Number 90. Using a paper map to navigate anywhere unfamiliar. Before you left for a road trip, you unfolded that enormous map across the kitchen table and traced your route with a finger. You noted highway numbers, exit names, and estimated the mileage between turns. You highlighted the route with a marker. If you missed a turn while driving, you pulled over, unfolded the map again across the steering wheel, and tried to figure out where you went wrong. Gas stations sold maps of individual states for $1 or $2, and people kept a whole collection of them stuffed in the glove box or the door pocket. Refolding them correctly was a skill most people never fully mastered. Some maps lived their entire lives crumpled into shapes that no longer matched the original creases. Number 89. Dropping off film and waiting days for your photos. You took 24 or 36 pictures on a roll of film. When the roll was full, you rewound it, popped it out of the camera and dropped it off at the drugstore or the 1-hour photo counter. If you chose standard processing, you waited 3 to 5 days. You had no idea whether your photos had turned out until you picked up that envelope of prints and flipped through them one by one. Half the time somebody had blinked, or a thumb had covered the lens, or the whole roll was overexposed because the flash did not fire. You paid for every single print whether it was good or not. There was no deleting the bad ones. They all came back and you paid for all of them. Number 88. Calling the movie theater to hear the recorded showtimes. Before, you could see a movie. You had to know when it was playing. You picked up the phone and dialed the theater's number. An automated recording rattled off every movie title and every showtime in a single breathless message. If you missed the one you wanted, you had to listen to the entire recording again from the beginning. Some theaters had different recordings for each screen, and you pressed a number on your touch-tone phone to hear the next list. People kept the newspaper's movie listings clipped to the refrigerator just to avoid making that call. The Friday evening paper had the full weekend schedule, and families circled what they wanted to see before the popcorn was even popped. Number 87. Making reservations by calling during business hours only. If you wanted to book a restaurant table, a hotel room, or a plane ticket, you had to call during the hours that business was open. There was no booking at midnight, no clicking reserve on a screen at 3 in the morning. You called, you waited on hold listening to elevator music, you spoke to a person who checked availability in a paper ledger or a computer terminal, and they confirmed your reservation verbally. You wrote the confirmation number on a sticky note and stuck it to the phone. If you lost that note, good luck proving you had a reservation when you showed up. Number 86. Watching whatever was on television at that exact moment. You did not choose what to watch. The network chose for you. If your show came on at 8 o'clock on Thursday, you were in front of the television at 8 o'clock on Thursday, or you missed it entirely. There was no recording it for later unless you owned a VCR and remembered to program the timer correctly, which half the population never figured out. Most people simply arranged their evenings around the broadcast schedule. Wednesday was for one show, Friday was for another. The television set the rhythm of your week and you obeyed it, because the alternative was watching whatever was on the other two channels or turning the set off entirely. Number 85. Standing in line at the Department of Motor Vehicles for hours with no way to check the wait time. Every interaction with the DMV required your physical presence, renewing your license, registering a car, changing your address, replacing a lost title. There was no online portal. There was no appointment scheduler. You walked in the door, pulled a paper number from a dispenser mounted on the wall, and sat in a plastic chair under buzzing fluorescent lights until your number was called on a digital board that blinked red. The wait could be 30 minutes on a good day. It could be 3 hours on a bad one. There was absolutely no way to know in advance which kind of day it would be. People brought paperback novels, crossword puzzle books, knitting projects, and brown bag lunches because a trip to the DMV was something you planned your entire day around. You told your boss you would be late. You told your family not to expect you for dinner. And if you arrived without the correct paperwork, if you forgot one document or brought the wrong form of identification, you went home, found it, came back, pulled a new number, and started the entire miserable process over again from the beginning. The phrase "take a number" became American shorthand for any bureaucratic nightmare, and it started right there in that building with the tile floors and the government-issued clock on the wall that seemed to move backwards. Number 84. Asking a stranger for directions when you got lost. If you ended up in an unfamiliar town with no idea where you were, you pulled into a gas station or rolled down your window and asked somebody on the sidewalk. You relied entirely on their memory and their ability to explain a route using landmarks. Turn left at the big oak tree, go past the church with the white steeple, then take your second right after the feed store. Half the time their directions were perfect. Half the time they sent you in the wrong direction entirely. You drove in circles until you found someone else to ask, or you spotted a road you recognized and followed it home. Getting lost was a real thing that happened to real people on a regular basis. Number 83. Sitting in a waiting room with nothing to do but read whatever magazines were stacked on the table. The dentist's office, the auto mechanic, the doctor. You sat in a plastic chair and picked up a copy of a magazine that was 4 months old. You read an article about something you had no interest in because it was the only thing available. There was no phone in your pocket, no screen to scroll. You just sat there. You stared at the wood paneling on the wall. You flipped through advertisements for perfume. Sometimes you read the same magazine twice if the wait was long enough, and nobody thought it was strange. Waiting meant doing nothing, and doing nothing was just part of the day. Number 82. Going to a verreading bookstore and browsing the shelves for an hour because there was no other way to find your next read. There were no algorithms suggesting titles, no customer reviews, no sample chapters. You walked in, looked at the covers on the front table, and pulled out whatever caught your eye. You read the back cover, maybe the first page, and made a decision based on a few paragraphs. Sometimes a staff member had written a recommendation on a little card taped to the shelf. That was the closest thing to a review you were going to get. You took a chance every time you bought a book, and sometimes you discovered something extraordinary that nobody had told you about. Number 81. Paying every single bill by writing a check and mailing it in an envelope. The electric bill, the phone bill, the mortgage, the credit card, the water bill. Every single monthly payment required you to sit down, open the statement, tear off the payment stub, write a check for the exact amount, seal it in the return envelope they provided, stick a stamp on it, and walk it to the mailbox. Most households did this ritual once or twice a month at the kitchen table, writing check after check in a single evening. If you forgot to mail one, you got hit with a late fee that could be more than the bill itself, and there was absolutely no way to pay it instantly when you realized your mistake at 11 o'clock at night. Number 80. Going to a department store to try on clothes because there was no way to order them from home. If you needed a new pair of pants or a winter coat, you drove to the store, walked through the racks, picked out what looked right, and stood in a fitting room under fluorescent lighting with a curtain that did not close all the way. You tried things on. You put them back. You tried something else. If your size was not on the rack, that was it. You either drove to another store or you settled. There was no browsing in your pajamas, no free returns. You did the work in person, and you carried the bags to the car yourself. Number 79. Stopping at a gas station just to ask how far away the next town was. Long drives on rural two-lane highways meant you often had no idea what lay ahead. No phone to check, no GPS showing the next services in 12 miles. You pulled into a station, walked inside, and asked the attendant how far to the next town with a motel, or where the nearest restaurant was. They gave you a rough number based on their own experience driving the road. You thanked them, got back in the car, and drove on with nothing but their word and your fuel gauge to guide you. If they were wrong by 20 miles, you found out the hard way when the tank ran low. Number 78. Keeping a junk drawer full of takeout menus from every restaurant in the neighborhood. When you wanted to order food, you opened the drawer and pulled out a stack of folded paper menus with smudged ink and grease stains from the last time someone thumbed through them. You passed them around the kitchen table. Everybody picked what they wanted. Then you called the restaurant on the phone, read the order out loud item by item, and gave them your address. If a menu was missing, you called information or drove past the restaurant to grab a new one. Those menus were your entire knowledge of what food was available within delivery range. Without them, you were cooking. Number 77. Watching the Weather Channel and waiting for your local forecast to scroll by. There was no weather app you could check in 2 seconds. If you wanted tomorrow's forecast, you turned on the Weather Channel and watched a scrolling loop of local conditions, regional maps, and national radar until your city finally appeared on the screen. That loop took several minutes to cycle through, and if you looked away at the wrong moment or stepped out of the room, you missed your region and had to wait for it to come around again. Some people called a local phone number sponsored by a bank that played a recorded forecast on a loop, updated every few hours by the National Weather Service. Either way, knowing whether to bring an umbrella required actual effort. Number 76. Circling job listings in the classified section of the newspaper. Looking for work meant buying the daily paper and turning to the classifieds in the back. You scanned columns of tiny print organized by category, circled the ones that matched your skills with a pen, and then called each one individually during business hours to ask if the position was still available. Half the time it had already been filled days ago. You mailed your resume with a cover letter and waited by the phone for a response that sometimes never came. There was no apply with one click. There was no upload your resume. There was just the newspaper, a pen, a stamp, and hope. Number 75. Renting a movie by driving to the video store on a Friday night. A Friday evening meant a trip to Blockbuster or the local mom-and-pop rental shop down the road. You walked the aisles, scanned the shelves organized by genre, and hoped the movie you wanted had at least one copy still sitting there. If every copy was checked out, you grabbed whatever looked decent from the new releases wall and settled. You drove home, watched it over the weekend, and had 2 or 3 days to return it or the late fees started piling up. People drove back across town on Sunday night just to slide that tape through the return slot before midnight and avoid the charge. Number 74. Waiting by the phone because you had no way to know who was trying to reach you. The phone rang and you had no idea who it was. No caller ID, no voicemail on most home phones until the late 1980s. If you were expecting an important call from a doctor, a job interview, or a relative in another state, you stayed home. You sat near the phone. You told your teenagers not to tie up the line. If you left the house, you missed the call entirely and had no way of knowing it had even happened. The person just got a ring that nobody answered, and they tried again later, or they did not. Number 73. Calling the hospital switchboard to find out what room someone was in. When a friend or relative was admitted, you did not get a text. You picked up the phone and called the main number, told the operator the patient's name, and waited while they looked it up. Then you wrote the room number down on a piece of paper so you would not forget. Visiting hours were posted on a sign by the elevator, and you followed them. There was no checking in through an app. You drove to the hospital, found a parking spot, walked through the front entrance, and followed the room numbers down a long hallway until you got there. That was the only way to show up for someone. Number 72. Shopping for a car by physically visiting every dealership in town. You could not browse inventory online. You could not filter by color, mileage, price range, or feature. If you wanted to buy a used car, you drove to the lot, walked the rows in the sun or the rain, kicked the tires, checked the odometer, and asked the salesman what he had. Then you drove to the next lot and did it all over again. A Saturday spent car shopping meant visiting 4 or 5 dealerships across town, test driving whatever they happened to have on the lot that week, and negotiating face-to-face with no reference point for what the car was actually worth beyond your own instinct. You relied on the Kelly Blue Book, which your bank branch or your library might have a copy of, or you simply trusted your gut and hoped you were not getting taken for a ride. The entire process could take weeks of weekends. You compared prices from memory because you had no spreadsheet, no side-by-side comparison tool, no consumer review site, just a notepad in your shirt pocket with scribbled figures and the growing suspicion that the salesman at the third lot had offered you the best deal. But you did not write down his name, and now you cannot remember which lot it was. Number 71. Going to the post office to send a package because there was no other way. Shipping anything to anyone required a trip to the post office. You brought your box, already taped shut and addressed, stood in line behind a dozen other people, and when you reached the counter, the clerk waited on the scale and asked where it was going. You chose between different speeds and paid at the window. If you wanted to track the package, you paid extra for certified or registered delivery and kept the receipt. There was no printing a label at home, no scheduling a pickup from your doorstep. You went to the building, stood in the line, and waited your turn like everyone else. If the line was long on a Monday after a holiday, you waited even longer. Number 70. Reading the encyclopedia to settle an argument at the dinner table. When two people disagreed about a fact, there was only one way to resolve it. Somebody pushed back their chair, walked to the bookshelf in the living room, pulled down the correct lettered volume, and looked it up. World Book, Encyclopedia Britannica, whatever set the family owned. You flipped to the entry, read the relevant paragraph aloud, and the person who was right earned a moment of quiet satisfaction. The person who was wrong went back to eating without another word. 1. There was no pulling out a phone in 2 seconds. Some arguments lasted an entire meal before anyone was motivated enough to walk across the room and check. Munning 69. Printing directions from MapQuest and bringing them in the car. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, before GPS was in every pocket, you sat at the family desktop computer, typed in your starting address and destination, waited for the page to load, and clicked print. The inkjet printer churned out several pages of turn-by-turn instructions. You brought them in the car and either read them while driving or had your passenger read them aloud. If MapQuest routed you wrong, and it regularly did, you were stuck following bad directions with no way to recalculate until you got home and tried again. People scribbled corrections on the printout for next time. Number 68. Calling collect when you were out of quarters and needed to reach someone. If you were at a payphone with no money, you dialed 0 and asked the operator to place a collect call. The operator rang the number you requested and asked the person on the other end if they would accept the charges. If they said yes, you talked and they paid. If they said no, you were out of luck. Teenagers perfected the art of cramming their entire message into the "will you accept a call from" prompt, speaking fast enough to say "Mom, pick me up at the mall" before the operator cut them off. The person on the other end got the message, declined the charges, and nobody paid a cent. Number 67. Keeping a handwritten address book and updating it every time someone moved. People moved. They changed cities, changed apartments, changed phone numbers. The only way to keep track was a small address book you kept in a kitchen drawer or by the telephone. You wrote each entry in pencil so you could erase it and rewrite it when the information changed. Over the years, some pages were erased and rewritten 3 or 4 times until the paper was thin. If you lost that little book, you lost your connection to dozens of people with no way to recover it. There was no cloud backup, no contacts app that synced. It was just a small leather-bound book that held your entire social world between its covers. Number 66. Buying a newspaper to find out what happened in the world yesterday. If something important happened after the evening news aired at 6:30, you did not know about it until the morning paper arrived on your doorstep. Wars, elections, natural disasters, assassinations. You went to bed uninformed and woke up to a headline. The morning newspaper was not a luxury or a habit. It was the primary mechanism by which most Americans found out what was happening beyond their own neighborhood. Missing a day meant missing the story, because there was no archive to scroll back through. Yesterday's news was in yesterday's paper, and if you did not have it, that information was simply gone. Number 65. Calling the time and temperature number to find out the correct time. Most cities had a local phone number, often sponsored by a bank, that you could dial to hear a recorded voice tell you the exact time and the outside temperature. At the tone, the time will be 7:42, and the current temperature is 31 degrees. People called it every morning to set their clocks and watches. Before digital displays became standard, the clocks in your house drifted by a minute or two each week, and this phone number was how you corrected them. It was free, it was always there, and for decades, it was the most reliable time source most people had access to. Number 64. Ordering from a catalog by filling out a paper form and mailing it with a check. Sears, J.C. Penney, Fingerhut, L.L. Bean. You flipped through the catalog at the kitchen table, picked out what you wanted, wrote the item numbers on the order form in the back along with the color and size, added up the prices by hand including tax and shipping, wrote a check for the total or carefully printed your credit card number on the form, and mailed the entire thing in the provided envelope. Weeks later, a package arrived at your door. If the item was out of stock, they sent a postcard telling you it was back-ordered. You never knew for certain what was available until your package arrived, or did not. Number 63. Driving to a store just to find out if something was in stock. You could not check inventory online. You could not call ahead in most cases because the single clerk on duty was helping customers and could not step into the back to look for your item. So you drove there. If they did not have what you needed, you drove to the next store. A single errand to find a specific item in a specific size or color could eat up an entire Saturday morning as you crisscrossed town going from store to store. Sometimes you found it at the fourth stop. Sometimes you went home empty-handed and tried again the following weekend. Number 62. Signing up for a class by standing in a physical registration line. Whether it was college courses, adult education, or a community center pottery class, registration happened in person at a specific time on a specific date. You showed up early, stood in a line that sometimes wrapped down the hallway and out the door, and when you finally reached the front, you filled out paper forms and handed them to a clerk who checked whether the class still had open seats. College students spent entire registration days running between buildings across campus carrying stacks of paper ad and drop slips, trying to assemble a schedule that did not have conflicts. If the section you wanted was full, your backup plan better have been ready. Number 61. Typing a research paper on a typewriter with no undo button and no spell check. Every mistake meant reaching for the correction tape, the white eraser wheel, or a small bottle of liquid correction fluid you brushed over the error and blew dry. If you made too many corrections on a single page, the page looked sloppy and you rolled it out and retyped the whole thing from scratch. Footnotes had to be calculated in advance so they fit at the bottom of the page before the margin ran out. There was no cut and paste, no moving a paragraph from page 3 to page 1. If your professor wanted structural changes, you retyped the entire document from the beginning. Some students spent more time retyping than they spent writing. Number 60. Calling the airline to check if your flight was on time before driving to the airport. If you were picking someone up at the airport or catching a flight yourself, you called the airline's customer service number, navigated an automated phone menu by pressing numbers on your touch-tone phone, and entered the flight number when prompted. A recorded voice told you whether the plane was on time, delayed, or canceled. If you did not have a touch-tone phone, you waited on hold for a human agent. Many people skipped the call entirely, drove to the airport, and simply sat in the terminal watching the arrivals board flip through status updates. You brought a book and a cup of coffee and you waited. Number 59. Tearing open a letter to find out if you got accepted, hired, or rejected. College admissions, job offers, scholarship results, contest winners. Everything arrived by mail in a sealed envelope. You did not get an instant email notification. You walked to the mailbox every afternoon for weeks, shuffling through bills and junk mail, searching for the one envelope with the right return address. A thick envelope from a university usually meant acceptance. A thin one meant a single sheet of regret. That walk to the mailbox and back, holding the envelope in your hand before opening it, could feel like the longest 10 seconds of your life, and there was no way to make it arrive faster. Number 58. Planning a dinner party without being able to look up a single recipe instantly. You owned cookbooks, or you did not. If you wanted to try something new for a dinner party, you went to the library, browsed the cookbook section, and hoped to find something that sounded impressive but not impossible. Or you called your mother long distance and asked her to read the recipe over the phone while you scribbled it on an index card, asking her to repeat the measurements twice. You could not type a dish name into a search bar and get 10,000 variations in half a second. Your entire cooking repertoire was limited to what you owned in print, what you could borrow from a friend, or what you clipped from the food section of the Wednesday newspaper. People traded recipes on handwritten index cards at church potlucks, at neighborhood barbecues, over backyard fences while hanging laundry. A good recipe was something you shared carefully, almost like a small gift, because finding one required effort. You filed them in a tin box on the counter and guarded the box like it contained something valuable. Because it did. Number 57. Waiting in your car at the curb because there was no way to text "I am here." If you were picking someone up, you parked outside their building and waited. You honked the horn once, maybe twice. You hoped they were watching out the window or listening for you. If they were not ready, you sat with the engine running and the radio on, drumming your fingers on the steering wheel. There was no quick message, no "I will be down in 2 minutes." You just sat there, sometimes 5 minutes, sometimes 30. The person inside had no idea you were outside unless they happened to look through the curtain. Eventually, you got out of the car and knocked on their door, which is what you probably should have done in the first place. Number 56. Taping a note to the front door when you left the house so people would know where you went. If you were expecting someone and had to leave for an errand, you grabbed a piece of paper, wrote a quick message, and taped it right to the door. Gone to the store, back by 3. At Grandma's, call later. The wind blew them off sometimes. The rain smeared the ink. Anybody walking by could read them. But it was the only way to leave word when there was no cell phone, no text message, and no voicemail. You trusted a piece of paper and a strip of tape to deliver the message, and usually it worked well enough. Number 55. Calling a store on the phone to ask about their return policy. There was no FAQ page. There was no website with terms and conditions. If you bought something and were not sure whether you could return it, you called the store and asked a clerk. Some stores printed policies on the receipt in tiny print, but not all of them. Some had different rules for sale items, electronics, and open packages. You called during business hours, you asked your question, and you hoped the person who answered actually knew the policy. If they told you wrong, you found out when you showed up with the item and the manager shook their head. Number 54. Rewinding the videotape before returning it to the rental store. Be kind. Rewind. That phrase was printed on stickers slapped on every rental cassette in America. If you forgot to rewind the tape before returning it, the video store charged you a small fee on your next visit. So before you drove back to drop it off, you popped the tape into the VCR, held down rewind, and waited for it to whir and click all the way back to the beginning. Some families bought a dedicated rewinder device, often shaped like a race car, specifically to save wear on their VCR heads and to speed the process up. Rewinding was a chore you did without thinking, the way you lock a door or turn off a light. It was just part of the routine. Number 53. Walking into the bank with a paper deposit slip every time you needed to put money in your account. Every deposit required a handwritten slip. You filled in your account number, the date, the amount in cash, the amount in checks, and the total. You signed it, handed it to the teller with your money, and they processed it while you stood at the window. If you ran out of deposit slips from your checkbook, you filled one out at the counter with the pen chained to the desk. The bank closed at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on weekdays and was not open at all on weekends in many towns. If your schedule did not align with bank hours, your deposit waited until you could get there. There was no mobile check deposit, no photographing a check with your phone. Number 52. Buying stamps at the post office because you ran out at home and could not print postage. When you ran out of stamps, your bills could not go out. You drove to the post office and stood in line to buy a book of them at the counter. Some grocery stores sold them at the service desk, but the selection was limited and the line could be just as long. Running out of stamps on a Sunday evening meant your payment would not go in the mail until Monday at the earliest, and you just hoped the bill was not due that week. People bought stamps in bulk and kept extra books in their desk drawer the way people today keep a charger cable in every room. Stamps were currency for daily life, and running out meant everything stopped. Number 51. carrying a pocket phrase book when traveling to another country. If you did not speak the language, you packed a little paperback that had common phrases organized by category: greetings, directions, ordering food, emergencies. You flipped through it at the restaurant counter while the waiter stood there waiting. You pointed at sentences, you mispronounced everything. The phrase book was your only bridge between you and a foreign city, and it fit in your back pocket. There was no translation app, no voice assistant, just a small book and your best attempt at the local language, which usually got you close enough to be understood and far enough off to be entertaining. Number 50. Dropping off a job application in person and asking to speak to the manager. Applying for work at a store or a restaurant meant walking in the front door, asking whoever was behind the counter for an application, filling it out by hand right there using a pen and the counter as a desk, and then asking politely if the manager was available to meet you. You dressed up for it. You tucked in your shirt. You shook hands firmly and made eye contact. That 30-second impression was your entire resume in many cases. If the manager was busy or not in, you came back the next morning and asked again. Persistence was the strategy, because there was no online portal tracking your submission. Number 49. Waiting at home all day for the repairman because the window was 8 to 5. When the washing machine broke or the cable went out, you called for service and they gave you a window. Not a 2-hour window, an entire day. Someone will be there between 8 and 5. So you stayed home all day. You could not leave for groceries. You could not run errands. You could not check a live map showing the van 3 streets away. You sat in your house, watched television, looked out the window every time you heard a truck, and hoped they came before the end of the day. Sometimes they did not come at all, and you called back the next morning to reschedule another full day of waiting. Number 48. Going to the hardware store with a broken part in a bag and hoping the clerk could identify it. You could not photograph the part, search for it by model number online, or order the exact replacement from a website. When something broke in the house, you removed the broken piece, put it in a paper bag or your coat pocket, drove to the hardware store, and showed it to the man behind the counter. You said, "I need one of these." He squinted at it, turned it over in his hands, walked to the back wall, and came out with something that looked close enough. If it did not fit when you got home, you drove back and tried again. Half of home repair in that era was making round trips to the hardware store with increasingly small pieces of broken things in your pocket. Number 47. Using a physical bookmark because no device remembered your page for you. If you lost your bookmark, you fanned through the pages trying to remember where you stopped reading the night before. Dog-eared page corners, torn scraps of napkin, old grocery receipts, popsicle sticks. Anything flat that could hold a place went between those pages. People had favorite bookmarks they used for decades, sometimes leather ones embossed with their initials, sometimes just a bent playing card. Losing your place in a long novel was a real frustration because there was no search function, no percentage bar, no last page read synced across devices. Your memory was all you had. Number 46. Watching the same television commercial 4 times in a single hour because there was no skip button. There was no fast forward on live broadcast television. Whatever commercials the network ran during the break, you watched them. All of them, every single time they aired. The same jingle played so often it burned itself into your permanent memory without your permission. You can probably still sing the Oscar Mayer Wiener song or hum the Folgers coffee theme decades later because you heard them thousands of times across thousands of evenings with absolutely no option to skip, mute, or scroll past. Those jingles are still in your head whether you want them there or not. Number 45. Filing your taxes entirely on paper with a pencil and a calculator. Every January, the forms arrived in the mail from the IRS in a large envelope. The 1040, the W-2 from your employer, the instruction booklet that was thicker than some novels and written in language that seemed designed to confuse. You sat down at the kitchen table with a pencil, a calculator, your shoebox full of receipts, and you worked through it line by line. If you made a math error, you erased and recalculated. If you could not figure out which form to use, you called the IRS helpline and waited on hold for 45 minutes. When you finished, you signed the form, sealed it in an envelope, stuck on a stamp, and mailed it before April 15th. Some people drove to the post office at 11:30 on the night of the deadline just to get that midnight postmark. If you owed money, you wrote a check and mailed it with the return. If you were due a refund, you waited 6 to 8 weeks for a check to arrive in your mailbox. The entire process took most households an entire weekend of concentration, and the low-level anxiety of having made a mistake followed you for months until you were reasonably sure the IRS had not sent you a letter asking questions.
Number 44.
Calling a friend's house and talking to their parent before you could reach them. There was no direct line to your friend. You called the family phone number and whoever picked up, usually a parent. You had to be polite, state your name clearly, and ask if your friend was available. Where be things? Sometimes the parent said they were eating dinner. Sometimes they yelled your friend's name across the house, and you waited in silence for 20 seconds while footsteps approached. Every teenager knew the awkward small talk required with somebody else's mother before you could get to the actual reason you called. And if you called too late in the evening, the parent told you it was past phone hours and to try again tomorrow. Number 43. Looking at a bulletin board in a laundromat or grocery store to find what you needed. Community bulletin boards hung on the walls of laundromats, supermarket lobbies, college dormitory hallways, and community center entrances. Little paper tabs dangled from the bottom of handwritten flyers pinned to cork. You tore off a tab with a phone number written on it and called later. That corkboard was your marketplace. Used furniture for sale, rooms for rent, guitar lessons offered, babysitters available, lost cats. Everything was advertised on a 3x5 index card or a half sheet of notebook paper. If all the tabs were torn off, the opportunity was almost certainly already gone. Number 42. Fast forwarding through the previews and warnings at the start of every rented tape. Every VHS rental started with previews for other movies, an FBI anti-piracy warning screen, and several studio logos before the feature film began. You held down the fast forward button and watched the screen flicker and jump in, high speed as you tried to find the start of the actual movie. You overshot it into the opening credits, rewound a bit, overshot again backwards, and eventually landed somewhere close. With some tapes, the previews lasted 5 or 6 full minutes. Some studios made the warning screens impossible to fast forward through. You sat there watching a blue screen crawl past at normal speed while your popcorn got cold. Number 41. Sending a fax and then calling the person to confirm they received it. Faxing a document meant feeding the sheet of paper face down into the machine, dialing the recipient's fax number on the keypad, waiting for the screech and the electronic handshake tone, and then watching the page slowly pull through. Then you picked up the telephone and called the person and asked, "Did you get my fax?" Half the time it had jammed on their end. The toner ran out. The paper tray was empty. The transmission cut off halfway through the 3rd page. Important documents were routinely faxed and then mailed as backup, because nobody fully trusted the fax machine to do its job without failing. Number 40. Making someone a mixtape as a way of telling them how you felt. You could not send a playlist link. You could not share a Spotify cue. If you wanted to express something to someone, something you could not say directly, you made them a cassette tape. You chose each song deliberately. You arranged them in a specific emotional order. You recorded them one at a time from your own collection, timing the pauses between tracks. Sometimes you decorated the case with hand-drawn artwork or wrote the track listing on the insert card in your neatest handwriting. The hours it took were the point. A mixtape was not just music, it was labor, it was attention. People kept them for decades because they were irreplaceable evidence that someone once spent an entire afternoon thinking about them. Number 39. Clipping wedding announcements, birth notices, and obituaries from the newspaper to mail to relatives who lived far away. If your cousin had a baby or a neighbor passed away, the news ran in a small column in the local paper. You cut it out with scissors, folded it into an envelope, and mailed it to whoever needed to know. That was how family news traveled across state lines. You did not post it. You did not share a link. You sent a piece of newsprint in the mail, sometimes with a short handwritten note underneath that said, "Thought you would want to see this." It arrived days later, and that was how people found out. Number 38. Watching for motel vacancy signs along the highway because there was no app to book ahead. On a long road trip, when you were tired and ready to stop for the night, you watched for signs along the highway. Vacancy, no vacancy. The words were lit up in neon on tall poles visible from the road. You pulled off the exit, drove to the motel, walked into the office, and asked if they had a room available. If they did not, you drove back to the highway and tried the next exit. Some nights you drove an extra hour down a dark road before finding somewhere to sleep. There was no way to book ahead from the car unless you pulled over, found a payphone, and happened to have the motel's number. Most people just drove and hoped. Number 37. Filling out a change of address form at the post office every time you moved. When you moved, you had to physically go to the post office, pick up a change of address card, fill in your old address, your new address, and the date the forwarding should start, and hand it to the clerk. If you forgot or procrastinated, your mail continued going to the old address. Bills got lost, bank statements disappeared, birthday cards went to strangers. The post office forwarded your mail for a limited number of months, and after that, anything sent to the old address vanished into the postal system. If you moved frequently, you learned the hard way that this form was not optional. It was the difference between receiving your life's mail and losing it entirely. Number 36. Collecting box tops and proof of purchase seals to mail in for free merchandise. Cereal boxes, frozen dinner packages, snack wrappers, and beverage labels all had small cutout symbols printed on them that you could collect and redeem. You saved them in an envelope in a kitchen drawer for weeks or months, then filled out a mail-in form, stuffed the box tops in an envelope with a stamp, and sent them off to a processing center. Weeks later, a t-shirt arrived, or a poster, or a small plastic toy. Schools ran box top collection drives where children brought them in by the handful and dropped them in a classroom jar to earn supplies and equipment. It was the original loyalty program, paid in patience and scissors. Number 35. Placing a person-to-person call through the operator to avoid paying if nobody answered. A person-to-person call meant you told the operator who specifically you wanted to speak with. The operator dialed the number, asked for that person by name, and if they were not home, the call was free. You paid nothing. Families used this creatively as a free signaling system. A college student would call home person-to-person asking for a fictional name the family had agreed on. The parents refused the call, knowing their kid was signaling that they had arrived safely. The operator moved on. Nobody was charged. It was a loophole people exploited for years because the system allowed it. Number 34. Waiting until the 11 o'clock news to find out what happened in the world after dinner. If an event occurred after the 6 o'clock evening broadcast, you had no way of knowing about it until the late news came on at 10 or 11, depending on your time zone and your local station. You went about your evening, washed the dishes, put the children to bed, and the world kept happening without informing you. Some events you did not learn about until the next morning's paper. The idea of breaking news alerts on a device in your pocket, buzzing at all hours, would have seemed absurd. You were informed on the world's schedule, not your own. And for the most part, nobody felt the need for it to be faster. Number 33. Dialing a 900 number to hear sports scores, jokes, or horoscopes by the minute. Premium telephone lines charged anywhere from 50 cents to several dollars per minute and advertised everywhere. The backs of magazines, late-night television spots, Sunday newspaper inserts. You dialed the number, Listen to a recorded message with sports scores, celebrity gossip, wrestling results, or a daily horoscope, and the charge appeared on your phone bill weeks later without warning. Parents opened their monthly statements to find mysterious charges from their teenagers calling joke lines or psychic hotlines. Those 900 numbers were an entire industry built on the simple fact that people had no other way to access trivial information on demand. Number 32. Sitting down and handwriting a thank you note for every single gift you received. After Christmas morning, after your birthday party, after a graduation ceremony, you sat at the desk in your room with a box of stationery and a pen and wrote a personal note to every person who gave you a gift. Your mother made certain of it. Dear Aunt Ruth, thank you for the sweater. I love the color. You addressed the envelope, licked it shut, put a stamp on it, and mailed it. This was not optional in most families. It was expected. People noticed if they did not receive one, and they remembered. The obligation could mean writing a dozen or more notes in a single sitting, each one made to sound warm and specific even if you did not particularly like the gift. Number 31. Keeping a shoebox full of receipts under your bed because there was no digital record of anything you bought. If you needed to return something, you dug through the box hoping you had not thrown it away. If you needed proof of a purchase for your taxes or an insurance claim, it was somewhere in that pile of fading thermal paper. Nobody organized them. You just dropped every receipt into the box and hoped for the best. Half of them were unreadable after a few months because the ink faded. But that shoebox was your entire financial history, and without it, you had no way to prove you paid for anything. Number 30. Adjusting the tracking dial on the VCR to get a watchable picture. If the image on the screen was rolling vertically, or if white static lines were running across the picture, you reached for the tracking button on the VCR remote or on the machine itself. You pressed it up or down slowly until the image stabilized and the lines disappeared. Every tape was different. A tape recorded on one machine often tracked poorly on another. You accepted a certain amount of snow and wobble as normal. A perfectly clean image was something you noticed and appreciated when it happened, because it was never guaranteed. Borrowed tapes, old rentals, and copies of copies often required constant adjustment through the entire viewing. Number 29. Carrying a pocket full of quarters everywhere because half of daily life required exact change. Quarters were essential currency for public life. Payphones, parking meters, newspaper boxes, vending machines, laundromat washers and dryers, toll booths, arcade cabinets at the pizza parlor. You needed them constantly, and running out meant your plans ground to a halt. People broke dollar bills into quarters at every opportunity. They kept a cup of them on the dresser, a roll of them in the glove compartment, and loose ones in every coat pocket. Losing a quarter to a jammed vending machine was a genuine frustration because that single coin represented a phone call home, a load of laundry, or a few more minutes of Pac-Man at the arcade. Number 28. Reading the back of a product box because there was no way to look up reviews from other buyers. You could not check ratings. There was no 5-star system, no customer photos, no honest stranger on the internet telling you whether this particular brand of paint covered well or peeled off after a week. If you were deciding between two products at the store, you read the label, compared the claims printed on the packaging, asked the clerk for a recommendation, or bought one and hoped for the best. Most purchase decisions were made on gut feeling, brand recognition, or the single recommendation of one person you knew who happened to have bought it already. Numbered trust was the operating system for all commerce because verification did not exist yet. Number 27. Circling houses in the real estate section of the Sunday newspaper when you were looking to move. There was no scrolling through listings with photos and virtual tours. You opened the classifieds, found the section for your area, and scanned rows of tiny print with abbreviations you had to decode. 3-bedroom, 1-bath, central air, fenced yard. You circled the ones that sounded right and then drove to the address to see them from the outside. If it looked promising, you called the number in the ad. That was house hunting. It took weekends, it took gas, and you made decisions based on a few lines of text and a drive-by. Number 26. Getting a busy signal and having to call back over and over for hours. If the person you were trying to reach was already on the phone, you heard a flat, repeating tone. That was it. No voicemail, no option to leave a message, no call waiting on most lines until the late 1980s. Melbourne tried again in 5 minutes, and again 5 minutes after that. Some evenings you redialed the same number a dozen times or more trying to get through. Teenagers especially, calling friends whose younger siblings were tying up the line, spent entire evenings hitting redial and hearing that same maddening tone. Mintuindif, important calls waited on the patience of the caller and the schedule of whoever was already talking. Number 25. Carrying an actual camera as a separate device because your phone could not take pictures. If you wanted to capture a moment, you needed a completely separate piece of equipment. You packed the camera in your bag, checked that it had film loaded and that the batteries were fresh, and remembered to bring it along. Most of the time you forgot it on the kitchen counter. Most of the time the moment passed entirely unrecorded. Birthday parties without photos. Vacations with no pictures from the first 3 days because the camera stayed in the suitcase. If nobody in the group remembered to bring one, the event simply existed in memory and nowhere else. There was no going back, no restaging it. The moment either got captured or it disappeared forever. Number 24. Writing your social security number on just about every form without thinking twice. Job applications, doctor's offices, school enrollment, insurance paperwork, rental agreements, your social security number went on everything. You wrote it down so often that you never had to look it up. It was on your checks. It was your college student identification number at some schools. Nobody talked about identity theft because the concept barely existed. That 9-digit number floated around on dozens of carbon copy forms sitting in filing cabinets all over town, and nobody worried about what might happen if the wrong person found it. Number 23. Physically walking into a government office for every form, document, and application. A birth certificate, a passport application, a marriage license, a building permit, a copy of your deed. Every single one required you to go somewhere in person. Stand in a line and fill out a paper form at a counter using a pen chained to the desk with a little metal ball chain. The clerk behind the window stamped it, handed you a carbon copy, and told you to come back in 2 to 4 weeks to pick up the completed document. Nothing was downloadable, nothing was printable from home. Every interaction with any level of government required your physical presence in a building that was only open Monday through Friday from 9 to 4:30. Number 22. Listening to the radio for hours waiting for a specific song to play. If you loved a song but did not own it, your only option was patience. You left the radio on all day, tuned to the right station, and waited. Sometimes hours passed between plays. Sometimes the station did not play it at all that day because the DJ had a different playlist. When the song finally came on, you turned up the volume and listened closely because you had no guarantee of when you would hear it again. Request lines helped. You called the station and asked them to play it, but even then the DJ decided when, and you had to be near the radio at that exact unpredictable moment. Number 21. Writing down directions on a napkin while someone described the route over the phone. Somebody told you how to get to their house, and you scribbled furiously on whatever was closest. A napkin from the kitchen counter, the back of a gas bill envelope, a torn corner of newspaper. Left on Main, past the light, right at the blue house. Third driveway on the left after the big willow tree. You brought that scrap of paper in the car and squinted at your own handwriting while driving, trying to decipher whether you wrote right or left because you were writing too fast to be neat. If you copied it wrong or they explained it poorly, you ended up lost on the wrong road with no way to call back and ask again. Number 20. Ordering a pizza by calling the restaurant and reading your order out loud to a person. There was no app, no website, no saved favorites, no order history. You picked up the kitchen phone, dialed the local pizzeria from memory, and told whoever answered exactly what you wanted. Large pepperoni, extra cheese, no onions. They repeated it back to you over the noise of the kitchen. You gave them your address, hung up, and waited. If they got the order wrong, you did not find out until the delivery driver was standing at your door with the wrong pizza. Complaining meant calling back, explaining what went wrong, and waiting even longer. Most people just ate it. Number 19. Keeping a paper calendar on the kitchen wall to remember every appointment and deadline. The family calendar hung on the wall near the phone, and it was the command center of the household. Doctor's appointments written in blue ink. School events in pencil so they could be erased if they changed. Birthday reminders. Bill due dates. Car inspection month. Everything was written in the little square for that date. If something was not on the calendar, it did not exist. There was no alert 30 minutes before, no notification popping up on a screen. You checked the calendar each morning and planned your day from what you saw written there. If someone forgot to write an event down, nobody else in the family knew it was happening until it was too late. Number 18. Driving to a friend's house unannounced just to see if they were home. You could not text first. You could not check their status or their location. If you wanted to see someone on a Saturday afternoon, you got in the car and drove to their house. You knocked on the door. If they answered, you visited. If nobody answered, you left. Maybe you scribbled a note on a piece of paper and tucked it in the screen door. Dropping by without warning was not considered rude, it was normal. It was how social life worked for most of American history. You showed up, and whatever happened next happened. If they were in the middle of dinner, they invited you to sit down. If they were on their way out, you said no problem and left. The spontaneity was part of it. Number 17. Standing in line at a box office for hours to buy concert tickets the morning they went on sale. Tickets for a big show went on sale at 10 in the morning on a specific Saturday, and you got in line at 6, sometimes earlier. The line started at the box office window and stretched down the sidewalk, around the corner, and down the block. You brought a folding lawn chair, a thermos of coffee, a paperback book, and a friend to hold your spot if you needed a bathroom. When the window finally opened, the line crept forward. Each person ahead of you bought their seats, and the best ones disappeared. By the time you reached the front, you took whatever was left and counted yourself lucky. Some people waited the entire morning in the cold or the rain and got turned away. Sold out. Those 2 words after 5 hours of standing on a sidewalk were crushing. There was no trying another website, no resale marketplace to check. Your only option was a scalper in the parking lot waving tickets in the air, asking triple the face value, and you had no way to know if they were even real until you handed over the cash and walked through the arena door. Number 16. Setting a mechanical alarm clock by turning a tiny dial and hoping you read it right in the dark. You wound the spring, adjusted the small pointer to your wake-up time, flipped the alarm switch on, and went to sleep trusting a mechanism the size of a tin can to get you to work on time. If you misread the dial in the dark, you overslept. If the power went out and you had an electric clock, it reset silently and the alarm never sounded. People set 2 alarms for important mornings, 1 electric, 1 wind up, because before cell phones there was no backup. If the clock failed, your morning failed. Nobody was calling to wake you. You either heard the bell or you did not. Number 15. Sitting in a parked car with absolutely nothing to do while someone ran into the store. No phone to scroll, no music to stream on demand, no game to play. You sat in the passenger seat of the parked car and stared out the window at the parking lot. You watched people push carts. You read the bumper stickers on the car ahead of you. You fiddled with the radio dial looking for something tolerable between static. 5 minutes felt like 30. Children in the back seat whined and kicked the seat in front of them. Are we done yet? Is she coming back? Boredom in a parked car was a universal, inescapable feature of American life before the glowing screen in your pocket gave you an infinite escape route from every idle moment. Number 14. Stretching the coiled phone cord around corners and through doorways to get privacy. The telephone was mounted on the kitchen wall, and the handset was connected to the base by a long coiled cord. If you wanted a private conversation, you stretched that cord as far as it would reach, around the corner, down the hallway, and into the bathroom or a closet. You shut the door on the cord and whispered. Teenagers were experts at this. They pulled the cord taut across the house like a tripwire and talked for an hour while family members stepped over it or ducked under it. Everyone in the house knew someone was on the phone, because the evidence was a spiral cord stretched tight across every doorway between the kitchen and wherever the teenager had hidden. Number 13. Driving to the store to buy blank tapes because you needed to record something that night. Whether you needed a blank VHS tape to record a program airing in 2 hours, or a blank cassette to make a mix, you had to physically go buy one. There was no downloading, no streaming, no pausing live television. If you wanted to preserve something, you needed a blank physical medium, and you needed to have it before the event happened. Running out of blank tapes on the night of a season finale or a once-in-a-lifetime live broadcast was a small household crisis. People kept spare blanks in a drawer the way you might keep batteries today, because running out meant missing something you could never get back. Number 12. Fumbling for exact change at the highway toll booth while cars honked behind you. Toll booths had 2 types of lanes: the exact change basket, where you tossed your coins in and the gate lifted, and the attended lane, where a person in a booth made change for your bill. If you hit the exact change lane without the right coins, you were stuck. You dug through the ashtray, the cup holder, the cracks between the seats, searching for a quarter while a line of cars formed behind you and horns began to sound. People kept a dedicated toll change cup in the car and refilled it deliberately. Forgetting to stock it before a highway trip was a guaranteed moment of public embarrassment at highway speed. Number 11. Copying something by hand because the nearest photocopy machine was across town or broken. Not every home had a copier. Not every small office did either, especially through the 1960s and 1970s. If you needed a copy of a recipe, a document, a tax form, or a passage from a library book, you either found a copy machine at the library for a dime a page, tracked down a copy shop, or you did it the old-fashioned way. You sat down and wrote the entire thing out by hand. Students hand-copied paragraphs from reference books because the volumes could not leave the building and the library copier was jammed. Carbon paper helped for letters, but for anything longer, your options were patience and penmanship. Number 10. Developing an entire roll of film just to find one usable photo. 24 or 36 exposures on a roll, and all you needed was one good picture. One passport photo, one portrait for the mantle, one shot of the kids that came out clear. You shot the whole roll over several days or weeks, dropped it at the drugstore, paid for processing, waited 3 to 5 days, and then flipped through the envelope of prints hoping at least one was sharp, centered, and had everyone's eyes open. If none of them worked, you loaded another roll and tried again next week. The cost of failure was not just the processing fee. It was the time you could never recover and the moments you could never restage. Number 9. Packing a suitcase full of books and magazines for a long vacation because there was no device that held them all. There was no e-reader, no tablet, no audiobook app. If you were going away for a week, you packed physical books, heavy ones, multiple titles, because you might finish the first novel by day 2 and have nothing left to read for 5 more days. A paperback for the plane, a thicker book for the hotel, magazines for the beach where sand might ruin something you cared about. Your suitcase weighed more because of reading material than because of clothing. Choosing which books to bring was a genuine decision with consequences, because you could not download another one if you made the wrong choice. Number 8. tearing articles out of magazines and newspapers to save for later because there was no way to bookmark anything. If you read something interesting, you ripped the page right out. Recipes went into a kitchen drawer. Articles about cars went into a folder. Travel pieces got clipped and pinned to a corkboard. People had entire filing systems built around torn-out pages from magazines they had already thrown away. You could not save a link. You could not screenshot it. If you wanted to keep it, you physically removed it from the publication and hoped you remembered where you put it a month later. Most of the time, you did not. Number 7. Waiting days or weeks for a letter back from someone who mattered to you. You wrote the letter, you walked it to the mailbox, you put the flag up, and then you waited. 3 days for it to travel there. However long it took them to sit down and write back. 3 more days for the return trip. A week at the absolute best. 2 or 3 weeks if they were busy or slow with a pen. The anticipation was real. Checking the mailbox each afternoon became ritual. When the reply finally arrived, you recognized the handwriting on the envelope before you even opened it. You held something physical that another person had touched, folded, sealed, and sent across the distance. There was a weight to that exchange that no instant message has ever quite replaced. Number 6. Spending every Saturday at the laundromat for weeks because your washing machine broke and the part took forever to arrive. When the washer at home gave out, you loaded the dirty laundry into plastic garbage bags, heaved them into the trunk of the car, and drove to the nearest laundromat. You fed quarters into industrial machines, sat on a hard plastic chair under flickering fluorescent tubes, and watched the drum spin while reading a magazine or staring at the wall. You waited for the wash cycle, then you moved everything to the dryers and waited again. You folded your clothes on a long communal table next to strangers doing the same thing. And you did this every single Saturday until the repair was finished. There was no ordering the replacement part online for next day delivery. The repairman called the supplier shipped by ground freight, and the part arrived when it arrived. 2 weeks, 3, sometimes longer. There was no YouTube tutorial showing you how to fix it yourself in an afternoon with a socket wrench. You waited. You hauled garbage bags of laundry in and out of your trunk every weekend. You kept a coffee can full of quarters by the front door. And the laundromat became your unwilling Saturday morning routine for as long as the machine stayed dead, which in some cases was a month or more, because the repairman had a backlog and your washer was not his only broken machine in town. Number 5. Going to the video store to rent a game for the weekend because you could not download one. You could not buy a game digitally. You could not try a demo online. If you wanted to play something new, you walked into the rental store, went to the small games section in the back corner, and scanned the shelf for anything that looked interesting and was actually in stock. You had it until Monday morning. If the game was too difficult to finish in 2 days, that was it. Your time was up. You returned it incomplete and maybe never got to play it again because next weekend someone else had already taken it home. Finishing a rented game in a single weekend required dedication, and some kids played straight through Sunday night just to see the ending before the due date. Number 4. Printing out every confirmation number, every set of directions, and every boarding pass on paper before leaving the house. In the years just before smartphones, you still needed physical printouts for everything. The hotel confirmation with the reservation number, the airline boarding pass from the check-in website, the MapQuest directions to the venue. A weekend trip required a manila folder full of printed pages organized in order. If the printer jammed, if the ink cartridge died, if you forgot to hit print before shutting down the computer, you were scrambling at the last minute trying to write things down from memory. People who traveled frequently kept their printers stocked and ready like a tool they depended on, because leaving the house without those pages meant leaving without proof of anything you had arranged. Number 3. Sitting on hold for 20 minutes listening to the same loop of music with no idea where you were in line. If you needed to call the phone company, the insurance office, or the cable provider, you dialed the number and waited. There was no estimated wait time, no callback option, no chat window. You just held the receiver to your ear and listened to a scratchy instrumental version of a song you almost recognized, interrupted every 90 seconds by a recorded voice telling you your call was important. You could not do anything else while you waited because you were tethered to the phone by a cord. You just stood there in the kitchen, waiting. Number 2. Trusting a stranger's word for something because you had absolutely no way to verify it on the spot. When someone stated a fact, you believed them or you did not. There was no pulling out a phone to check. A friendly debate at a dinner party about which year a movie came out could go unresolved for the rest of the evening or the rest of the month until someone happened to come across the answer in print. A mechanic told you the engine needed a new part, and you trusted him because what other choice did you have? A salesman told you the price he quoted was the lowest in town, and you took his word for it because checking meant driving to every competitor. People made decisions based on reputation, instinct, and face-to-face trust because instant verification simply did not exist. Your judgment was all you had. Number 1. Being completely unreachable the moment you walked out the door. Once you left the house, you were gone. Nobody could find you. Nobody could call you. Nobody could send you a message or track your location on a map. If you left at 9 in the morning and came back at 6 in the evening, nobody on earth knew where you were in between unless you told them in advance. Not your boss, not your spouse, not your children, not a single person. You existed in hours of pure silence and solitude that no longer exist anywhere in modern life. Today you are findable every minute of every day. Reachable, trackable, accountable to a device that never lets you disappear. But before all of this, before the internet and the cell phone and the constant digital thread connecting you to everyone at all times, you had something that has quietly vanished from the world. You had hours that belonged entirely to you, uninterrupted, unmonitored, unrecorded, and nobody thought twice about it, because that was simply what freedom felt like. Those were 100 things you actually had to do before the internet changed everything. Some of them sound exhausting now. Some of them honestly sound like freedom. And if you are old enough to remember even half of this list, then you lived in a world that moved slower, required more patience, and rewarded the kind of resourcefulness that most people today will never need to develop. Which one of these brought back the strongest memory for you? Which one made you say, "I completely forgot about that"? Tell me in the comments below. And if this video reminded you of something you had not thought about in years, hit that subscribe button, because there is a lot more where this came from. Namdram Sedi Awing. Thanks for watching, and thanks for remembering.